In the summer of 1999, I was a young intern at a SETI facility in eastern Colorado when we received a transmission. That transmission was not from space. It was from the future, and it was addressed to me. So I've spent the last 20 years trying to decode this transmission, which came in the form of an audio-visual file. And in large part due to the fact that I was using a computer that was running Windows 98 software, it took a while, but here we are. I finally got it decoded, and I've seen it, and it's quite revelatory, I must say. And so as a world premiere, I'm presenting it to you, the YouTube viewer, so that you can see the terrible nightmare of what is to come in the far-flung future of the year 2020. Keeping in mind that I'm recording this prior to the Biden campaign announcing who their vice presidential nominee is going to be, and that after that announcement is made, it's going to throw the mathematics off again. As of right now, I'm putting Trump at 60% odds of winning and continuing on in the presidency. That's hardly enough to make it like a guaranteed clincher by any imagination. But the Republicans still have just a basic ground game in place in terms of just the civil-mindedness, the civic-mindedness of their voting population, and the ease at which rural voters in particular have to be able to go to their polling places and vote and go home without the big long waits and complications and lines that come with voting in the cities with urban and therefore more liberal populations. But the Democrats are already acting like they've won. Most of the mainstream news channels that I pay attention to and the talking heads that I pay attention to already act like this whole thing is sewn up and wrapped in the bag. Possibly even worse than they were acting that way back in 2016 before the election. And right there, first mistake. Part of what the Democrat Party had as a problem in 2016 is that so many people assumed that Hillary Clinton had it in the bag and that everyone was going to vote for Hillary. I mean, they were telling us that like she had 90% odds of winning. Is that deflated the motivation for enough people to not show up and vote in the right places that Trump was able to take the electoral win. And so you're running the risk of doing the exact same thing by acting like this is a sure thing already. You're not doing yourself a service by doing that. The case against Trump should entirely be that he started the shutdown, but the Democrats are now on the side of the shutdown, so they're not prone to use that to attack him. But the thing that could actually undermine him the most with his own supporters is if you hammer in the fact that all the chaos and nonsense and economic disaster that has happened in this last year is all traceable to the moment when he announced that they're just going to shut the country down. That wasn't a guarantee. That didn't come from some higher power. That's on him. And regardless of the hypothetical lives that have been saved by that, that's just all a giant question mark. People still got sick. People still died. It still feels like it's overblown and over-exaggerated compared to how we react to everything else in life that is deadly, if just as deadly, or if not more so deadly. But for some reason, COVID is the one disease that we take seriously, but okay. It's hard to argue to all the people, you know, that like, oh, you should support this guy because you didn't die in an alternate universe. That's a hard argument to sell. And a lot of bad has happened, a lot of traceable bad, from the economic disaster, the people on unemployment, the growing number of homeless people, the eviction crisis that's starting to emerge, and it's probably already kind of been around, just bubbling quietly, but it's about to get worse now that eviction moratoriums are starting to to pop up, and all the grandstanding between the parties in Congress, and then of course all the riots and protests. I mean, George Floyd himself would probably still be alive if the COVID shutdown had not happened, just because of the simple butterfly effect of how everyone in the country's days would have been slightly different for the 2 months preceding him being at the wrong place at the wrong time. So he might not even be dead. None of this shit would be happening. We wouldn't be having the kinds of conversations we're having, and we wouldn't be having the kind of thoughts that we're having. If life would be normal, and we'd just be arguing about Trump's Russia connections or something else. And so it's hard to not feel like it's not that they started it, but this has all been capitalized upon by the Democrats as some sort of calculus to help them ride a wave of public sentiment back into power. But they're undermined by their overconfidence, and they're undermined by just the basic city fact of Democrat voters will go out and vote if they're excited for the candidate, but if they're not, it's a lot harder to guarantee they're going to show up. My analogy is pretend you hate heavy metal. You can't stand heavy metal. It's just not your thing. And you really, above all other heavy metal bands, Metallica is the heavy metal band that you hate the most. And Metallica is going to be having a concert in your town tonight. And you really want to like make a show of how much you hate Metallica. And so what are you going to do? You're going to go stand in line for 4 hours to go watch a Megadeth concert instead. You still don't like heavy metal. You don't like Megadeth. But you really hate Metallica. So you're going to go watch Megadeth and stand in line and be around a bunch of people to go make a point about your distaste for Metallica. Well, that right there is the problem with Democrat voters. If they don't like the band, it's hard to get them to actually want to put up with going to the concert, so to say, to run with the analogy. And Joe Biden is not a good band. I mean, the really hardcore woke people know that Joe Biden is one of the parties responsible for the very crime bills that have led to the last 30 years of the upping of the ante of the incarceration of black youths and all that kind of stuff. So trying to use Black Lives Matter as a political movement to get on their shoulders to carry Joe Biden into power. That's unnatural bedfellows right there, and while there's a lot of useful idiots in the crowd that will play along with it, the double woke will see the trick that's being pulled on them, and their motivation, people were kind of psyched into thinking that Trump was this demon before he ever even got into office. And I just have trouble seeing exactly what it is that he's done to the black community to deserve this sort of animus that he's getting, aside from just the defiance of the political agendas of their chosen party. I mean, what has he been doing? Everyone's been making money, black unemployment and all that kind of stuff, if you want to go with statistics. And just statistics are an easily manipulable medium. And I'll be getting to some stuff about polling here in a minute. But, it's just such an unnatural bedfellow that this is the party path to power with Biden. I guess it's just entirely banking on the sentiment of oh, we remember Joe Biden as just being Obama's nice white uncle. Oh, goofy old Joe, he's back. Why didn't they just run Michelle Obama? That would have been better. That would have been something I could have considered voting for at least. Biden, as Obama's quirky sidekick who doesn't actually have any real power or influence, I was fine with him. But I wouldn't want Joe Biden to be president. He was the guy whose idea was to split Iraq into even more smaller countries drawn by outside Western powers, and and stuff like that. He would not have been a great choice for president. And so, like, other things that the Democrats, so, like, there's an enthusiasm issue. I guess the commonplace way of looking at it is maybe they should have, like, allowed the Bernie people to actually win the nomination because they had the energy behind them. But I'm not even sure if that's true. When you look at what the early primaries were indicating, Buttigieg seemed to be the one that, like, had the early momentum. And then there was that Super Tuesday where everyone else quit, including Buttigieg, and then suddenly Biden's the nominee because they're worried about Bernie's people steamrolling all the way to the election and keeping anyone from getting enough delegates and then having a contested election. So they did some sort of backdoor thing that got everyone to quit except Biden and Bernie, and then Biden would just absorb everyone who was turned off to the Bernie thing. It was maybe not technically cheating, but that was a bit of calculated Risk playing, if you remember the old board game Risk. And man, that might have been a mistake. It probably was a mistake. And then there was like this, you know, for the Democrat primary started like a year or two early. Remember that long period in 2019 where there was like 30,000 Democrats all running for office, and they'd have these like overly crowded debates. And then as we got closer and closer to the actual point where people would actually be voting in the primary to show who they really support, all they had were like, you know, poll numbers to indicate who's up and who's down. And polls mean nothing. And because they had started it all so early, a lot of these candidates ran out of money long before they were able to get to a point where they could actually prove whether or not people were really genuinely responding to them in terms of actual votes, not just whatever the hell pollsters claim that people are answering based on their trickily worded questions that they use. Like, we never got a chance to see how Andrew Yang would perform. He got chased out because of polls. We never really got to see how Tulsi Gabbard would perform. We never really got to see how Kamala Harris would perform. But of the people who did manage to stick out that year, that grind, that calculated, we're just going to grind most of these people out of the process before they even get a real chance to show anything, so we can maybe hopefully get rid of some of the quirkier people. The fact that as soon as people on the internet started responding to Andrew Yang, he gets declared alt-right. I mean, period. Okay, so here's another thing that the Democrats have been doing to undermine themselves. For the last several years, they've basically been on a purity spiral. And if you're not sufficiently progressive enough, you get ditched from the party. And there's a calculus, especially with the whole activism and the embracement of social justice type stuff, and piggybacking on BLM, of that, you know, they're hoping that, like, okay, yeah, we will alienate some people from our party, but we're going to gain in so many new people who are going to vote for us, it'll make up for it. But I think they're kind of missing the fact that these people that are being alienated, I mean, the entire classic liberal wing of the Democrat Party has been declared alt-right. So who are they going to vote for if they've been pushed out of the party? You might be, like, you're ejecting part of your own party so that you can recruit some new younger members. But it might balance out what you've lost, but you forget the fact that what you've lost is probably going to go join the other side. And so you're adding to your quote-unquote enemies' own pool of resources by engaging in this purity spiral kind of stuff. So good luck with that. So what is that, the third, fourth thing now? That's like a large systemic problem that the Democrats are kind of doing to themselves, that undercut their ability to get the vote out. Well, speaking of getting the vote out, we have the whole thing of the push to mail-in ballot voting because of COVID as an excuse, which on the surface, like, maybe isn't a bad idea. And if we were in a more sane year and we were a more sane people, I might be more for it. But consider the fact that in a normal election year where things aren't crazy, there's a certain percentage of people who will go to the trouble of getting up out of their beds, turning off their televisions, getting into their car, driving to wherever their nearby polling place is, standing in line, walking in, getting into their little booth, looking at the little thing, and then instead of voting for a serious candidate or voting for one of the second-tier, third-party candidates, they'll go down to the fill-in-the-blank slot and write Mickey Mouse. That's something that happens frequently. It's an actual statistic. And you're going to mail voting ballots out to every address in the country in the hopes that, like, everyone's going to, like, lockstep and fill in the little bubble next to Joe Biden? I don't think they're way underestimating the kinds of chaos and silliness and frivolity that's going to cause, especially if they're dumping ballots on people who don't vote at all and don't pay attention to this shit. You're going to get so much weirdness out of that. So I don't necessarily see how that's supposed to be like some sort of like guaranteed lockstep strategy. And then, like, so what are the alternatives that are also being presented too? Because the Democrats are pretty fractured. Not everyone's on board with Biden. Not everyone's cool with it. The few people I've spoken to who have admitted that they're going to do for it all describe it as, I'm going to hold my vomit and vote for Joe Biden. There's no enthusiasm there at all. And a lot of people are just quiet when I ask. So, I mean, I live in Austin, and I may have seen like one Joe Biden bumper sticker. I still see Beto O'Rourke and Bernie Sanders bumper stickers on people's cars. I've seen a couple of Trump bumper stickers on people's cars. But I've only seen one person in the last several months with any sort of Biden paraphernalia on their vehicle on my way to and from work. And that's a little thing. But I remember previous years, oh God, there's so much Obama shit everywhere back in the day. And a lot of McCain stuff, and a lot of Romney stuff. I mean, like, this is like, I don't know. It's not a good sign. It's hard to, like, take that as a predictor, but you could take it as an omen, perhaps. So, you have a party that is way too overconfident, and worse, overconfident publicly, so that they're giving the impression to their voters that, don't worry guys, we're going to win no matter what, which undercuts motivation for people to actually get out and vote. You got this dubious idea of switching to mail-in ballot voting, which will probably cause a lot more chaos than it will help. It's just as my guess. You have the fact that they've been ejecting whole portions of their own voting base on the hopes that they're going to be able to attract newer, younger, woker voters to come in line for them, because they've been raising activists pretty much as kind of like a reaction to the George Bush era. And now they're hoping to cash in on it. We'll see how well that goes. A youth movement that's all about destroying any remnants of institutions that had anything to do with the Civil War are going to loyally vote for the Democrat Party, the party that was in charge of the Confederacy. Yeah, no one's going to notice. No one's going to notice at any point that that's going on, and start to ask uncomfortable questions and redirect the pitchforks and torches. So yeah, you have all that. Then you have, like, there's that poll that indicated that something like 60% of the country doesn't feel comfortable expressing their political views, lining towards conservative political views. People who have extreme liberal views feel totally fine telling people all about it. But people who have conservative views are afraid to speak up. And, well, that's probably a good indication that a good chunk of the country and a good chunk of people you might be talking to on any given day, online or offline, might not actually being the truth-telling about what their political intentions are. It also means that further skews polls, because that means that all those polls that are like, 51% of the country likes Biden and 44% hate Trump, all that kind of shit, those could be off by as much as like 10 to 40% probably. Because those all could be terribly off. Terribly off. If 60% of the people are afraid of expressing their opinions, that means they're also afraid of expressing those opinions to pollsters. And since that fear lines in one direction more so than the other, it shows that there's a hidden trend line in the data that's not being seen because it's not being reported to the people collecting the data. And that's a problem. That adds to the reinforcement of the initial thing I said about the overconfidence. They just assume they got this one. It's because they're being lied to by their own polling research. It's a perfect storm. And then you just have the basic ground game of the ease in which rural populations get to go vote. And we've had several months now of cities being burned down, cities controlled and run by liberal politicians. Like the hopes, like the real hope that the Democrats had is if you can undermine part of Trump's voting base enough against Trump, and that's probably the older people, the retired population. If you can undermine them enough to vote Democrat instead, you might be able to like undermine that just basic ground game number, and so that the Democrats, even though they have all these factors running against them, they might still be able to overcome just that basic solid level of Republicans that will always show up. But I just don't know what all these months of the cities being burned to the ground. I mean, have you seen any recent footage of Minneapolis lately, or Portland? It's like looking at footage of Syria and shit almost. Yeah, I would almost think that the media, because they know that their profit margins are screwed, it's almost as if they're running like a giant reverse psychology to make sure Trump gets reelected by making the Democrats look as bad as possible. Because that's kind of ultimately like my conclusion here. There's no viable alternatives. Kanye West is nothing more than a rich guy for some reason choosing to have an extremely public nervous breakdown. So for whatever reason, but it's too late for him to really have proper ballot access, and he's not going to be president. Brett Weinstein's Unity 2020 project, the idea of like getting Andrew Yang and some Republican general to run as co-presidents. Like there's things about it that sound like, oh, maybe like, oh, that's kind of cool hypothetically. Like this would be a good like setup for like a kingdom in a fantasy novel or a science fiction world or something. But just mentioning the idea casually to non-internet people, and they scoff at it. So that's probably a non-starter. And also, it's too late to really do anything. They're not going to be able to get in on any debates. They're probably not going to be able to get ballot access, all that other kind of stuff. Parties that do have ballot access are libertarians. I haven't heard anything about who's running for libertarian president this time, and there doesn't seem to be a Gary Johnston sentiment going on this time around, unlike in 2016. And thankfully, Jill Stein is not running for Green Party again. They got some guy like Horowitz or something like that. I know nothing about him. There was some excitement and energy for people who wanted to draft Jesse Ventura to run for Green Party, but Jesse Ventura himself doesn't seem to be interested in doing it because of the internal politics of the Green Party. And so if they're allowing that to hang them up from actually having someone who is a proven, viable, possible contender, there's a certain amount of Trump voters who could bring themselves to vote for Jesse Ventura. And there's a certain amount of liberal voters who could bring themselves to vote for Jesse Ventura, especially with the Green Party platform. where he actually could actually like surprise everyone and pull it off and actually win, like he did when he was governor of Minnesota. But he doesn't seem to be doing it, so that's not a thing. And so we're stuck with the whole, the classic choice between two evils, in which case I abstain. I was against Trump initially, not for any like fears of him being fascist. I mean, we throw the word fascist around so much it's kind of meaningless. Fascists were a specific political party with a specific political party platform, and they've been gone for a long time. It's just the same as blindly describing things as being Nazis. Nazis were a very specific thing to their time and place. Whatever, like, there is an authoritarianism about Trump in some ways, but there's also like a strong let people do what they want to do libertarian type of a streak to Trump. And so just blanket calling him a fascist is, that's just blind. It's obtuse. And it's self-deceiving to convince yourself that that's what you're looking at there. Now his problems are that he's a shisty businessman who his entire life has been like basically like using the letter of the law to get around the law. And then you give him the tools of the presidency, and then they wonder why it's going to be hard to ever specifically nail him down on anything that he might do that's questionable, because his whole thing is using the letter of the law to skirt the law and get away with it, because he's still staying within the technical text of things. But he hasn't been doing as much with that as in terms of negative that I would have anticipated, and he's done a couple of things that I'd liked. I liked that he shut down the TPP, and I liked I'm for the whole ending the Korean War, and I'm for not going to war with Russia, and all these other sorts of things that for some reason are like now anti-liberal positions. I mean, in the early Democrat primary, there's people saying that Tulsi Gabbard was secretly right-wing because she's anti-war. As I recall, in 2008, during the Democrat primary in 2008, the main reason why Obama was able to beat Hillary Clinton back then was because he gained the support of the anti-war movement. But as soon as Obama came on television one night and told us that we had killed Osama bin Laden, the anti-war movement just seemed to just kind of disappear into the wind. And now, being anti-war is a right-wing position? Perhaps there's truth to the old adage that the problem with our two-party system is that the Republicans are dumb and the Democrats are evil. What a terrible choice to have to be left with. Joe Biden, it doesn't matter who his vice presidential nominee is. If your only thing that you're waiting for to be able to give you permission in yourself to feel like you're okay with voting for Biden is his choice in vice president, then why isn't his vice president running for president? Like, why do you need Joe Biden at all? If you're not excited for Biden, you shouldn't give a shit who his running mate's going to be, regardless of like what particular genital package and trans identity they may or may not end up having. But on the Republican side, like, for whatever Trump was doing good, yes, like the economy was up and people's jobs numbers are doing well, and a general trend I've always found in my life is that I've spent about half my life under Republican administrations and about half my life under Democrat administrations. And I tend to find that during the Democrat administrations, our general media environment is more peaceful, and everything's chill with the government. Don't worry, guys. But unemployment tends to be up, and crime tends to be up, and people on the street level of life kind of aren't having it all so well. And during Republican administrations, we're always being told that the world's going to come to an end and they're going to fuck everything up and destroy us and make all of our children into a bunch of militant, Bible-thumping racists. But for some reason, like, generally everyone's life seems to be good and people are working and, able to acquire material possessions, and raise their kids and all that other kind of stuff. It's the worst things that you can lay at the feet of the Trump administration are the exact same complaints that you could lay at the feet of any Republican administration. They're not any better or worse in how they've been running the show than the Bushes or the Reagans of my life. So the idea that this is some sort of like existential like threat, I think the existential threat isn't to the country, it's specifically to the Democrat narrative. That's the existential threat that Trump presents. But Trump is the one that authorized the shutdown. In the midst of all of a time of growing time and plenty where things were going well, and he was undercutting all these narratives about like which party is actually, you know, like actually trying to help the little guy and all that kind of stuff, where you're seeing this weird transition where like academia was becoming the now go-to voting pool for the Democrats and the left, and the working class was becoming a right-wing creature instead of a left-wing creature, certain to make Karl Marx have to be spinning over in his grave. In the midst of all that, I forgot what I was going to say. But in the midst of all this plenty, of all these upward trends, of all the good that was being done, the same guy who could try to take some sort of credit for it is also the guy who then suddenly veered the whole thing into a ditch and then set it on fire. And whether or not the reasons for it might have been good, I mean, like, it's very rare. One of the weirdest things about the whole COVID thing is that, like, normally global leaders don't give this much of a shit about if the population gets sick from stuff. I really think the only real reason why this is being treated as seriously as it is comes down to the fact that all the world's most richest, powerful people politically or in terms of wealth, they all fall into that age range that is the most susceptible to having a rather shitty death from COVID. And all these people can't be cut off from their chain of servants, the people who fold their bed sheets and wash their ass and bring them their breakfast and drive their cars, and the people those people know and the people those people know, because of the high transmissibility of COVID and the fact that they cannot be perfectly isolated from the chain of production that supports their lives, they have to shut everyone down so that they can stay safe. The whole reason why the economy has been tanked across the planet, and the only reason why this has been such a universal thing, is because we're protecting people like the Queen of England and the Rothschilds and aging, elderly, retired presidents, and just, you name it. All the old people who are still clutching their octogenarian hands onto the levers of power. Those are the people that we are all suffering for. And it comes down to it, the only reason our economy is really being wrecked by all this isn't because of the shutdown in and of itself. It's because of our speculative stock market is still running and devouring our economy, because our economy is not able to meet its expectations of growth. If we would have just put all of that on pause and just allowed businesses to operate off just the classic, do you make enough money a month to pay your bills? Okay, fine, you're good, you can stay open. But no, it's not only do you make enough money to cover your expenses, but then you also have to like skim an extra 20% off the top or some shit to fucking pay off some fucking people who gave you $20 5 years ago. That's what's fucking wrecking it. I'm not saying we necessarily have to get rid of investment. We could have just put it on fucking pause for a while. Those people have money, they could get by. Those people are in much better shape to survive several months without income than the people who are losing their jobs are. None of this would have happened. George Floyd wouldn't be dead. All these people, like we would be living in a different continuum right now. if we hadn't shut down for COVID. Yes, some people would have died, just as people died for SARS and influenza and AIDS and cigarettes and automobile accidents and slipping on a soapy surface in their goddamn shower stall, or being hit by a car or hitting someone with a car. Life is nothing but death at every turn. And it's only because we don't want to die that we keep ourselves from falling into any ones of billions of... There's so many different potential ways I could accidentally kill myself just sitting here in my room if I really put my damn heart into it. And it's like that everywhere for everyone. But just on this one little thing, we're going to just completely just fucking freak out, throw up our hands, and give up on life. It's fucking weird. The fact that it happens in election year, it's fucking weird. Would the COVID shutdown have happened if Trump hadn't gone along with it? If he hadn't gone along with it, he would have just been battered for it. I guess maybe it's the similar kind of calculus he makes on like not really cracking down on any of the rioting. Because if he does, then they can just bash him over the head for being a fascist, more so than they already do. I mean, like, even with the things that have been being done by the Trump administration to try to, like, curtail some of the activities, declaring Antifa terrorists, the whole thing about black-bagging rioters off the streets in Portland and shit, that is so tame compared to what an actual fascist police state government would be doing. Actual fascist police state governments would have no hesitation to like open up into whole crowds with machine gun fire. It wouldn't be people complaining about, oh, this one girl got killed because she got hit in the eye really hard with a rubber bullet. It'd be 200 people were mowed down by heavy caliber machine gun fire, which tore them limb from limb with explosive concussive force as each bullet entered their bodies. Like this is so not a fascist response to any of this shit. And so I guess it's how much are people able to see this, even if they're not willing to articulate it, and that no one's saying any of it for them to hear. The race narrative shit too. It's like, how is this even a racist thing? The only thing racist about the whole like Black Lives Matter shit going on is that it's kind of an act of cultural appropriation, considering that like the BLM riots are by and large mostly white kids piggybacking and rioting on behalf of black people, which last I checked would meet the definition of cultural appropriation, I would think, but maybe that's just me. Trump made a big terrible mistake, but everything that's happened since then seemingly isn't going to cost him much in terms of voters, because I don't see that the Republicans are going to turn their back on him over that mistake. Because what's their alternative? Is Joe Biden going to make shit better? So, for my basic calculation, Trump's probably going to be able to hold with the numbers he has. He might not be able to gain a bunch of extra voters, but who knows? As I say, when the vice president nominee is announced, supposedly later this week, this is going to throw all the pieces on the checkerboard in the air again. But as of right now, the Democrats have so many different factors working against them. Things that are not just cutting their momentum back, completely depleting all the wind behind their sails, but also actively like gouging and wounding themselves and bleeding out part of their own voting base on this massive assumption that they're going to be able to gain additional voters. It reeks of desperation. They have no real leader to give us. They have no real message. It's just anti-Trump. And when you really sit down in the quiet of your life and detach yourselves from not having to impress anybody else, and just, when you're all alone with only yourself, What is it that Trump has really done to deserve the animosity that he gets, aside from being the cause of the chaos unleashed by the COVID shutdown? See you in November. Pretty chilling stuff, I must say, knowing what is to come. So, of course, while in the midst of putting this video together, and right before I was going to be able to put it up on YouTube, the news broke that Joe Biden has chosen Kamala Harris as his running mate, which is like amongst the top three I was thinking he was going to pick, so like no real surprise there. I'm not exactly sure what this is supposed to signal to the whole anti-police movement, considering that she's an attorney general, I want to say was what her spiel is. And, wasn't her whole takedown moment in the debates from Tulsi all about her questionable actions when she was in charge of the police departments and the prosecution of people and all that kind of stuff? So we'll see how that flies. On the other hand, maybe that's supposed to signal to the nervous Nelly voters who might end up switching sides to Trump if they feel that the Democrats are just going to like set the whole country on fire and get rid of all the cops. Maybe that's supposed to signal to them that no, Biden's going to be a safe ticket. They're going to restore order as soon as they're in office. The hammer of justice is going to start coming down on everybody. And I'd say as a signal really for people to take to Kamala Harris is that to the hard progressive movement and to the Black Lives Matter movement, Biden's not on your side, guys. So, good luck with that. I'm not sure yet how this might change things. I'm going to have to give it a day or two, see how various entities online and beyond react to this news, and see how other people that I know in day-to-day life, non-internet related activities, feel about these sorts of things before I'm willing to make an assessment off of news that I literally just learned just a few moments ago. But yes, Kamala Harris is the VP, so I might drop him back down to like lower 50% odds, like 51, 52%. It might have gotten better for him though. This might push him up to 70%. We'll see. Like I said, I'm going to need a couple days to calculate this in my head.